And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode, or it should be really an interview with Rob, EOS Detroit. What's good, man? How are you? Finally, I get to have someone on here that is from my city. So this is great, man. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining today.
I'm good today. Blood, thanks for inviting me on here. Really glad to be here. Talk about EOS Detroit, what we're up to.
Yeah, man. I met you first about a year ago over at Grand Circus. There was a panel you were on, and my at that time co-founder of the startup we were doing. He was on the panel with you, and we talked afterwards. You really intrigued me because I saw that, or I heard during the panel, you were very active within the Steam It community. You were saying a lot of good things about Dan Larimer. I'm like, oh, okay, this guy is he knows his stuff. And you've been around for a while, man. So how did you get into cryptocurrencies? Kind of take us from your point of entry on to BitShares, Steam It, and then we'll then get into EOS Detroit.
Sure, happy to. Uh, like a lot of other people that I know that got into crypto, they heard about it early on. So I remember talking about Bitcoin in 2011, actually, with some roommates in college.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of dabbled with it, talked about, hey, wow, this is really interesting way to store and transmit value, and started to let our imaginations run rampant, kind of like what this could do. Uh, as more of an activist, I'd say that's what really piqued my interest. It's really amazing the opportunity for finance and trading that crypto and the blockchain crypto asset industry enables, but that's not really my personal interest.
Right.
Not a trader. I have dabbled. Now I just sort of hold what I've got and just work on building value on that. So, anyways, I've dipped in and out of the industry over the last 7 or so years as a hobbyist.
Mm-hmm.
And 2013, I had more time to read and started reading more about, Bitcoin and how it works and wrapping my head around it. I was studying computer science, so I was getting I was getting a lot of the theoretical stuff necessary, like background in cryptography and things like that to
Right.
understand it. And I was putting it together more in my head. And one of my buddies from college actually put me on to BitShares. So he pointed me to this really interesting project that promised to solve throughput issues,
Mm-hmm.
the issues of having centralized custodian exchanges. So, Mt. Gox really spurned Dan on to theorize BitShares and conceptualize it. And it was just sort of a right place at the right time thing. I went to bitsharestalk.org, got on the forum, started reading and learning all about economics, philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
mapping out different cryptography schemes and algorithms. Like, it was all there on that forum. And there's only a few hundred people at that time, which eventually grew to a few thousand, but it was just like a really interesting high level of discourse forum where I was just observing and learning. And that's
Nice.
how I really got put onto it. Um, Played with BitShares, promoted it, figured out how could I help this thing as a community member, because I had the incentives, right? As someone who had bought in a little, it's like, okay, now I have skin in the game and I'm going to make it better. And that's really the whole idea here with DAX. Same
Mm-hmm.
idea with Steam, EOS, Ethereum, Bitcoin. That's why it gets so tribal too, because I
Yep.
think it's kind of like I got to promote my own stuff. But it is good if you're a fundamental value analysis or doing fundamental value analysis in the space to be intellectually honest about things and really digging down into the nuts and bolts and figuring out where the problems and the pain points are and how we can get over those hurdles so we can get to mass adoption. Anyways, I drifted out of BitShares in 2015, got a day job again. This is that wax and wane I kind of mentioned earlier. And then
Absolutely.
in 2016, Steam launched, and some friends that are actually working on Steam It at the core company from the BitShares community put me
Mm-hmm.
onto that and said, hey, you got to look at this. This is really interesting. It's proving out some new experiments in the space. So allocating value that's created through inflation to using stake weighted votes. So that's
Mm-hmm.
basically what the Steam blockchain allows us to do with content. And, getting into that and being a contributor there, I learned like, wow, this is game changing. Like being a part of the Steam community really changed my life. Met a lot of great people, got motivated and psyched up to really go full tilt into the industry. And
Yeah,
so
man, and I was excited about Steam it as well when I found out about it about a year and some change ago. Um, I'm very excited about seeing blockchain being used or utilized. Right, that's what really excites me nowadays. The speculation, price, and where it's going. Bitcoin going to 1 million and all that. That's all fine and dandy, but I'm over that. I'm so tired of hearing that type of stuff. I really want to see, in order for us to get to those types of numbers, we need to actually see adoption of this technology. So I think Steam it and others as well are really starting to push that envelope and really get people to use it on a daily basis, not for where is it going the next hour or so, right?
yeah, to do some fundamentally innovative stuff, right? So that I totally agree with you there. Right now, the market is very speculation driven. There's a lot of naysayers, I think, that don't totally understand what's about to happen. My hypothesis is we're about to see that huge influx of new users using mature decentralized apps that allow for new business models and new types of innovation to occur. And the thing that's really been holding us up is usability concerns, usability and performance concerns.
Right.
You see, I'm not sure if you've checked out blocktivity.info, but that's a great site that actually ranks chains based
Yep.
on
I've
the
seen that.
activity.
And Steam it is at 1 right now.
Yep. Yep. It's
Still,
been holding
still.
that pretty steadily because
Yeah.
every post, every comment, every upvote, those are all blockchain operations. And yeah, so that's where all that activity is coming from. So we can,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always have to be a financial transaction. We can put all kinds of actions in web apps into these and create new incentive models. And to me,
Right.
at the end of the day, being able to create incentive models that align behaviors in different directions from the current industries and traditional services we have today is like kind of the one of the really core fundamental innovations that will provide huge efficiency gains, allow wealth to be allocated more liquidly,
Right.
allow passive consumers to become participants and active participants that have active ownership in the service. And right now, I mean, it's really hard to tell, what's where the real value's at. I mean, space is overrun with people trying to get a piece of the pie. So I think we'll know when those apps are upon us because their user bases will speak for them, basically. And I think those apps will be upon us really soon. Like, by the end of the year, we'll see some big players coming out with, large user bases that are D apps. And this really marks the fundamental shift from that speculation driven market to the utility driven market, in
Yeah.
my
Yeah, I agree.
kind of going to lead the charge on that because it's going to be a place where those apps can exist
Mm-hmm.
that solves a lot of the usability issues that plague the industry today.
So yeah, man, Rob, that's great. And you mentioned Blocktivity, and I have that on the site on the screen for the viewers to check out. Very very interesting site, and it shows you again, like you said, the utility, the activity of the top blockchains. And we have here Steam still at number 1. It's been this way for a while, actually. It's a little known tidbit that Steam's blockchain has been the most does the what is it produces the most blocks or has the most activity.
Highest amount of transactions per unit of time, basically.
Yeah, so it's been like that for over a year and some change, right?
March 2016 is when Steam launched. So it's been a little over 2 years now. Another interesting thing about that site, if you hover over the gauge where on Ethereum, it'll tell you how many unconfirmed transactions there are. So that's like the mempool of transactions building up, all the transactions waiting to get through. And you can see we've got, 33,000 confirmed. So, Ethereum's not cutting the mustard. And if we expect to have millions of users using dApps, we need the right infrastructure, the right protocol to facilitate that.
Right. Now, what do you think about Ethereum as far as their future endeavors? They want to do sharding, and Casper, possibly moving to a hybrid system. Is that really going to cut it? Do you think they're going to be able to implement that? I think it's a big stretch, but what are your thoughts? You know better than I.
Well, I haven't done enough due diligence, like deep research into that to really be able to make a call. But my gut instinct here is that similar to Lightning Network,
right,
Raiden Network, like these meta protocols, I think Counterparty is another meta protocol that exists on Bitcoin. It's like kind of bolting on add-ons instead of fundamentally redesigning the engine to be more efficient. So some of those add-ons may allow you to get a little more oomph out of it, but what's the trade-off? Like, to me, it's additional complexity.
Right.
How easy is it going to be for developers to make apps that leverage the sharding capabilities? Or is it going to be hard for them to ration about and develop around? I don't really know the answer to those questions. But based on the pace at which Ethereum development is moving and the difficulty for them to come to consensus about how to evolve the protocol, which is another problem Bitcoin has as well, it's hard. I feel like they can't move as fast as protocols that are using delegated proof of stake.
Right.
So delegated proof of stake protocols have governance mechanism right on chain. So if the top BPs were like, we want to implement some new code release that benefits us at the expense of the community can be like, nah, and fire them all and hire in new BPs that support the release of code that they wish to be implemented.
So let's talk
a SegWit debate or something like that. If there's something to that, like something that contentious that comes up for change on EOS, like the shareholders kind of get the last word, or the stakeholders, because they can always vote for the block producers that will implement the code they want.
So we'll get into that very point about BPs voting. There's been a lot of drama. Some of it's been FUD, and we'll get into that. But first, let's talk about why you chose to kind of transition from Steam, and I'm sure you still use it, but now you're the CEO of EOS Detroit. Talk to us about why EOS really intrigued you as the next step in blockchain technology and evolution.
Sure. So the space moves so fast. And sometimes you just have to cut your losses and move on to the next mothership, right? And I think, to me, EOS is that mothership. It's like, so BitShares and Steam were Dan's experiments that allowed him to prove out application-specific functionality. But the fundamentals still weren't great there. And a lot of lessons learned from those two projects have been incorporated into EOS.
Right.
So in BitShares, the developers didn't really have enough vote, or there wasn't enough. Basically what happened was Dan released this worker proposal system with the BitShares 2.0 release, which is also called the Graphene code base. And the stakeholders didn't hire Dan's worker in. So Dan was like, well, I ran out of money to develop on BitShares, and I created a system and I didn't get voted in. So I guess I got to move on. Went on and did Steam, which is a totally different beast, right? And the protocol is different. It's inflationary and it doesn't have fees. So that experiment couldn't really be had on BitShares because it was so fundamentally different. So now we've learned a lot from Steam. Some of the major issues facing Steem, in my opinion, is the distribution of the stake. So Steem It Incorporated has, last I checked, it was somewhere around 30%, might have dipped under 30% of all Steem. That's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for one company to own like almost a third of the supply.
Right.
And over time, because of the inflationary mechanism, their share will actually shrink. But, Block One has set up a much more robust vesting schedule for their stake in EOS. So already, Block One is getting 10% of the supply, which is 3 times less, which Steem It Inc. has, and it's vested over 10 years. So already that's a huge fundamental difference in distribution that I think is more compelling. Another thing with Steem is there's no governance over the common pool resource of the rewards pool. So it's like a public good kind of, and big stakeholders that are whales can choose to pay themselves off. There's like no real, you can buy people's vote in Steem. Mm-hmm. There's all of these different, secondary markets around buying votes, leasing, Steem power. A lot of times, like we've seen in the past, like one author will just get tons of rewards, and there's all this other good content not getting much. And so that the kind of way that Steem from inflation has been allocated to the content creators isn't always great. Part of that has to do with the fundamental distribution. So everyone feels like their vote ain't worth much because the whales have so much of, a huge concentration of it. There's a few stat sites around that will show you some of those distribution graphs. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, those are some of the reasons why I decided, like, I'm just going to go to this thing that's being set up with really long-term goals place. And also, it's got delegated proof of stake 3.0. So now it's even lower block interval than Steem and BitShares had, which is a half a second. So it's even more robust. Like, and it does have differences about it that maybe are trade-offs, right? So that deeper governance layer can be a rabbit hole. That is a radical new experiment. We'll see how it plays out. I think so far it's been very interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's very early, man. And so I think that's what a lot of people are really setting the bar really high for EOS, probably because they raised, and I don't want to say they raised, the market gave them $4 billion. And so, I think the bar is set really high with that. But I do think, man, this is like if EOS can really pull this off, and we can talk about Dan Limmer's Constitution 2.0 a little bit. But if we can pull this off where we have a governance on the blockchain, that will be a really good step for humanity in the right direction, I think.
I agree. I think that what it could mean if we do this right is huge, because to me it's a shift from you're forced into a governance structure to you get to choose one.
Right.
And I think voluntary interactions, voluntary trade, these are all good things. And anytime force has to come into the equation, we should try to minimize the amount of times that force needs to come into the equation, right? It's horrible. War and proxy wars and, all of the things going on in the world today that are perverse and have perverse incentive structures and capture of power and all of that. I mean, at the end, what we want to do is empower individuals with this stuff and sort of hold those big power brokers to account. And to me, that's why I'm here. I mean, I want to build a better, fairer, more equitable socioeconomic system. I think that's the promise, and we need to aim high for that. There's all kinds of naysaying and like, oh, blockchains are horrible for databases and all this. It's like you got to look deeper at really what the innovation is here, which is allowing humans to organize in new radical manners.
Mm-hmm. In a trustless way, right?
Mm-hmm. And trust minimized and sometimes trusted in a sense, because like when you allocate your votes to a BP, you're trusting them to do a good job. You're
right.
It's like, would you hire someone that you don't trust? Probably not.
Right.
So it's about using reputation and accountability to hold people to higher levels of trust.
So let's talk about this whole BP
Sure.
situation. A lot of FUD around this. People are saying that um, EOS is very centralized. Kind of explain what's going on and also what this Ricardian contract is all about. Like, I don't think a lot of people understand this whole concept.
Yeah.
So kind of break that down for us, Rob.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, in delegated proof of stake, we're not, you don't stake your tokens to have a chance of producing the block. You delegate that responsibility to some other entity that you trust, whether that's a human, a company, it's one of the two usually, a team or an individual. But the reason why this isn't a big deal to do that, and why I think the calls that it's centralized are sort of flawed, is the stakeholders can change their votes at any time, and everything's public on the blockchain, so you can detect manipulation, collusion. I mean, block producers can get together and have conversations on a band, but I mean, we can detect if they're doing a good job or not, and we can fire them if they aren't. We can see other shade, the money trails all on the chain. And really, at the end of the day, 21 entities that are independent from each other. And I think that's important, that we uphold that independence as block producers and not cartelize. And that's something that, we need transparency. We need good processes in place to hold block producers accountable. But that 21 is actually a pretty significant number of individual entities if we're in that ideal state. And if we look at mining pools today and how they cartelize and consolidate the block rewards,
It's much more concentrated,
like
right?
More relevant ones. So whether you're looking at Bitcoin or Ethereum, these huge mining pools are essentially acting as huge block producers. But rather than every block producer having an equal chance to produce a block, which is what delegated proof of stake gives us, instead it's just like, well, the one with 40% of the hash power gets to produce 40% of the blocks. They continue to cartelize. And
so let me play devil's advocate, because I had this conversation with someone on Twitter about this very point, because I put an article on Twitter about how Bitmain is at just about 9% away from being at 51% of hash power, and the person's like, well, we can move away from that pool if we see them doing anything maliciously. So
yeah,
is it really an issue that let's say a Bitmain secures 51%, which they have done in the past, by the way, for people that may not know. I remember they got very close. I can't remember what happened, but explain why that is still not a good thing.
Sure. I mean, anyone with hash power that is joining a pool can choose to allocate their hash power to another pool. That's like a voting process, right? So in proof of work systems, hash power is used for voting. But I don't know if you agree, but it feels to me the way that tokens, crypto assets trade and how their price moves, it makes them feel like commodities to me.
Absolutely, they are.
And stocks typically convey some form of voting right.
Yes.
So with Bitcoin and Ethereum, the holders of that token don't have any representation in the system. There's a layer of indirection where the hash power holders have the representation. And I personally think it's better to have that more pure representation where the token gives you some say in how the system's governed, not through this indirection of hash power, which also, by the way, is extremely wasteful.